Καλή σας μέρα. Καλώς ορίσατε στο Εθνικό και Καποδιστριακό Πανεπιστήμιο Αθηνών. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. The opening ceremony of the conference, entitled Athens in Ancient Philosophy, begins with a welcoming address by the Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, International Relations and Extroversion, Professor Sofia Papaioannou.
Honorable Minister of Education, Religious Affairs and Sports, Mr. Pierakakis, Honorable Member of the Academy of Athens, Professor Nehamas, distinguished members of the board of the University of Athens, distinguished vice rectors of our university, Professors Evstathopoulos, Karagiannis and Samitas, dear Chair of the Department of History and Philosophy and Science, Professor Hadjimoisis, dear Director of the new MA program in Ancient Philosophy, Professor Thanassas, dear conference speakers, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to open this conference today, an event that celebrates in the most appropriate way a momentous occasion in the academic history of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, the launching of the Athens MA in Ancient Philosophy, the first English-speaking MA in Greece devoted exclusively to the study of ancient philosophy, a program which is based in Athens, but is the outcome of the collaboration of 4 leading Greek universities. The title of the conference, Athens in Ancient Philosophy, aspires to approach from a variety of perspectives the central role of Athens in ancient philosophical networks from the classical era till beyond the late antiquity. Indeed, as the description of the conference theme points out, the exceptional role of Athens in the intellectual and cultural revolution of the classical era of Greece has always fascinated the students of the ancient world. The Athenians were not very numerous, quote, not very powerful, not very organized, as the classicist Humphrey Quito noted half a century ago, but they nevertheless had a totally new conception of what human life was for, and showed for the first time what the human mind was for. Like Silicon Valley today, ancient Athens, during the brief period between the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian War, became a talent magnet, attracting smart, ambitious people. A city with a population of about 300,000 people, a third of them slaves, it was an unlikely candidate for greatness, if you think well about it. Other Greek city-states were larger, Syracuse, or wealthier, such as Corinth, or even mightier, such as Sparta. Yet Athens produced more brilliant minds, from Socrates to Aristotle, than any other place in the world has seen before or since. Only Renaissance Florence comes close, perhaps. When was Athenian genius simply the convergence of a happy set of circumstances, as the historian Peter Watson has put it? Or did the Athenians make their luck? This question has stumped historians and archaeologists for centuries, But the answer may lie in what we already know about life in Athens back in the day. The ancient Athenians enjoyed a deeply intimate relationship with their city. Civic life was not optional. There was no such thing as an aloof, apathetic Athenian. The man who took no interest in the affairs of the state was not a man who minded his own business, wrote Thucydides, but a man who had no business being in Athens at all. In retrospect, many aspects of ancient Athenian life, including the layout and character of the city itself, were conducive to creative thinking, philosophical thinking. All of ancient Athens displayed a combination of the linear and the bent. All of ancient Athens displayed a combination of the linear and the bent, the orderly and the chaotic. The Parthenon, perhaps the most famous structure of the ancient world, looks like the epitome of linear thinking, rational thought frozen in stone, but this is an illusion. The building has not a single straight line, an archaeologist will tell you. Each column bends slightly this way or that. And their efforts, the Athenian efforts to nourish their minds, led to the construction of the first global city. Master shipbuilders and sailors, the Athenians journeyed to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bringing back the alphabet from the Phoenicians, medicine and sculpture from the Egyptians, mathematics from the Babylonians. The Athenians felt no shame in their intellectual pilfering. Of course, they took those borrowed ideas and put their own stamp on them. Athens also welcomed foreigners themselves. They lived in profoundly insecure times, but rather than walling themselves off from the outside world like the Spartans, the Athenians allowed outsiders to roam the city freely, even during wartime, often to the city's benefit. Some of the best-known sophists, as you know better than I do, were foreign-born. It was part of what made Athens, Athens. Openness to foreign goods, new ideas, and perhaps, most importantly, odd people and strange ideas. The greatest of Athenian oddballs was Socrates. Never before or since has a man and a city been so perfectly matched. Eccentric, barefoot, and stubborn, Socrates occupied that precarious position that all geniuses, philosophers do. Perched between insider and outsider, he was far enough from the mainstream to see the world through fresh eyes, yet close enough to it that his insides resonated. And it is probably the reason why philosophy always kept returning to Athens and why ideas born elsewhere took their definite form in Athens. With these few words, which were more than few, actually, I wish you a fruitful conference. I regret that many duties, administrative and academic, prohibit me from attending the talks of this conference. And I would very much like to attend the talks by some of the most influential thinkers in ancient philosophy today. It's a great honor for our university, and thank you for being here. Your presence signals the momentous occasion of the inauguration of this new MA in ancient philosophy and inspires optimism that this new program will make Athens a destination for the study of the very subject. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. I would like to call and give the step to the Honorable Minister of Education, Religious Affairs and Sports, Mr. Pierakakis. Dear Minister.
Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ, κυρίες και κύριοι. Thank you so much. It's a great joy to be here, and needless to say, I am genuinely delighted to stand before you today on this special and symbolic occasion. Launching the Athens Master of Arts in Ancient Philosophy is a very significant step forward for the academic ecosystem of Greece and for us as Ministry of Education. To offer this master's degree, 4 major Greek universities from 4 different cities in 4 different areas joined forces, and the present MA represents a cosmopolitan face of the Greek academic world. Congratulations to the faculty and to the staff of the universities who worked tirelessly to bring this program to fruition. Your dedication to scholarship and your commitment to providing an exceptional educational experience for our students are truly commendable. And needless to say, the present master's degree is a result of your vision, your commitment, and your task that represents our vision as well. We have to note that this master's degree in ancient philosophy represents an opportunity for students internationally to learn the philosophical endeavors of the ancients in the same areas where the ancients dwelled. And this by itself has a symbolic, I would say, value, but also a very significant pragmatological value. I would like to welcome the students who have chosen to be part of this master's degree. Your decision to study ancient philosophy in Athens is a testament to your intellectual curiosity and your desire to engage with timeless questions about the nature of existence, knowledge, and morality. And undoubtedly, the Athens MA in ancient philosophy will be a transformative experience for you as well. Ancient philosophy holds a special place in the rich tapestry of human intellectual history. It is the foundation upon which many of our modern ideas and values have been built. The works of great philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, Socrates have profoundly influenced the course of philosophy and various aspects of our society, from ethics and politics to science and culture. And in a world facing complex political challenges, political debates and environmental crisis, the insights of ancient philosophy are as relevant as ever. And if I'm allowed to make a personal note, this comes from a computer scientist who, while studying artificial intelligence on many elements of the various aspects of policy that we need to design AI for, philosophical questions emerge on many of those aspects. And we need to treat them systematically. And the works of the ancients and the point of view of the ancients is extremely significant to attempt to answer those questions. The Athens MA in ancient philosophy is not just an academic pursuit. It's an invitation to engage with the intellectual giants of antiquity. And through this program, students will have the opportunity to delve into the works of Plato and Aristotle, to ponder the ethical dilemmas posed by the Stoics and the Epicureans, and to explore the metaphysical questions that have perplexed philosophers for centuries. But this program is not just about the past, as I mentioned. It's about how the wisdom of the ancients informs the present and shapes the future. Once again, let me assure you that the Ministry of Education fully supports the Greek academic world and endeavors, especially endeavors such as these. And I've already expressed my appreciation and respect for our researchers and academics, and I believe that they deserve results worthy of their abilities and commitment. Our strategy is about making this country an international educational center, a more cosmopolitan educational center, and this endeavor, I think, lies at the heart of what we want to achieve. In conclusion, this program represents not only a new chapter in the Greek university's mission, but also a testament, as I mentioned, to the enduring relevance and importance of philosophy. I am confident that the Athens MA in ancient philosophy will foster a community of scholars who will continue to explore the wisdom of the ancients and continue to contribute to the ongoing dialogue about the fundamental questions of human existence. I look forward to witnessing the intellectual journey of our students and the impact that they will undoubtedly have on the world. And our promise is that the Ministry of Education will support you at every step of this journey. Thank you so much.
We invite now the President of the first session of the conference, Professor at Princeton University and member of the Academy of Athens, Alexandros Nechamas, to coordinate the first session.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. My position here is more or less decorative. What I will do then is call upon Professor Hadjimoisis, the chair of the Department of the IFE, the Philosophy of Science, to say a few words about our new program. Thank you, Professor Hadjimoisis.
Philosophy is the name of a calm passion, the love of wisdom, the desire to understand not only the world around us, but also our own self. One of the best ways to enhance that understanding is the exchange of ideas between people coming from different academic, intellectual, cultural backgrounds. It is thus with great pleasure that we welcome international students as potential collaborators in our unending quest for philosophical knowledge. Our department is home to 6 MA programs. Last week we had the inaugural conference of the MA in Contemporary Philosophy. A couple of days ago in this building we had a public event about Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. Last evening in Megaron Hall, we held an event about contemporary art and new technologies. This wide variety of topics, however, would be left adrift without a solid intellectual anchor that only the systematic study of ancient philosophy can offer. We are thus grateful to our colleagues from the University of Athens, Thessaloniki, Patras, and Crete for choosing this institution as the basis for this world-class, research-driven MA program. We wish you every success. Thank you.
Now call on Professor Katerina Ierodiakonou to say a few words.
It may be the case that according to Aristotle's version of the history of philosophy, ancient philosophy started in Miletus rather than in Athens. But there should be no doubt that philosophy, at least the way we understand it today, could have been developed in any other city-state, for example in Sparta, but only in Athens. This is, I think, the topic of our conference today, and this is the reason why for many years now we wanted to have an MA in ancient philosophy in Athens. Our aim is that our students, by living and studying in this city, will get something of the experience that citizens of this city used to have during the classical and Hellenistic period, when they were walking from Plato's Academy to Aristotle's Lyceum, to the Epicurean Garden, and to the Poikili Stoa in the Athenian Agora. They could thus listen to an array of philosophical doctrines, participate in long and complex philosophical discussions, and make up their minds about the best way to reach eudaimonia so that they can have a life worth living. I hope there will be more occasions in the future to thank everyone who made possible the realization of this MA program. And I would like to thank in particular our colleagues from the University of Thessaloniki, of Crete and Patras, but also our colleagues all over the world who encouraged us and supported us. Especially, I would like to thank our director, Panagiotis Thanassas, because without his hard work and unstoppable determination, we wouldn't have been here to celebrate the beginning of the Athens MA in Ancient Philosophy. Thank you.
The MA program is the work of many people, but I now call on what is in fact the efficient and formal cause of the program, Professor Panagiotis Thanassas.
Honorable Minister of Education, Mr. Pierakakis, Honorable Vice Rectors of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, Honorable Chair of the session, Professor Nehamas, Honorable members of the board, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and students. Our conference pays tribute to Athens. Athens, as Katerina already said, is not the birthplace of philosophy, but it is where philosophy took shape as an enterprise of logos, chiefly characterized by argumentation, by a logon didone. As we all know, Athens stands as the city where philosophy has been cultivated continuously for at least 10 centuries, from the 5th century BC to the 6th century AD. But what about today? Today, in Athens, we acknowledge an old debt, the debt to re-examine and profoundly reflect on the philosophical tradition that flourished in this city. This debt can only be fulfilled now, for it is only in recent years that Greece has developed a genuine academic community dedicated to the study of ancient philosophy. This means that Greek scholars are now seamlessly integrated into the global academic world. Our community has now dispelled the shadows of provincialism, publishing in international journals, engaging in debates with international colleagues, and rightfully claiming their deserved place in the global academic landscape. We are endeavoring to fulfill this debt also with the establishment of the Athens MA in Ancient Philosophy. The inception of this program resulted from a series of associations, the details of which I'm certain hold little interest for our audience, in the early hours of July 3rd, 2020. Today, 3 years later, we proudly welcome the inaugural cohort of 13 students, 3 hailing from the US, 3 from China, and 1 each from Brazil, Italy, Mexico, the Netherlands, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and Greece. In its inaugural year, the program garnered 24 applications, from which 16 candidates were accepted, and we are delighted to have 13 students currently enrolled. This promising beginning sets the stage for the program to establish itself as a premier choice for those aspiring to study ancient philosophy in Europe. Notably, we stand as one of the rare programs globally with an exclusive focus on ancient Greek philosophy. Mr. Minister, Mr. Vice Rectors, and Mrs. Vice Rector, sorry, Sophia as well. You may wonder what you can contribute to this program. We do not need and do not anticipate a direct positive contribution to this program from your end. However, we do seek your assistance in removing a series of impediments imposed by the Greek administration in general and by the processes followed in our university in particular. We appreciate, dear Minister, the generous financial support of the Greek state in the internationalization of Greek universities, for which support I would like, by the way, to extend specific thanks to the former Secretary General of the Ministry of Education, Apostolos Dimitropoulos. Additionally, I would like to stress the significant overall help of the Study in Greece initiative organized by the Harokopion University and Professor Michalakelis. However, Mr. Minister, out of our 13 students, only 11 are present here today. 2 of them are still grappling with the challenges posed by Greek consulates worldwide. Today is, of course, a day of celebration, which I don't want to overshadow with complaints. However, I remain at your disposal, Mr. Minister and Vice Rectors, for a more comprehensive report of the hurdles we have faced and still face. If we envision the Athens MA to continue operating successfully within the framework of Greek public education, a resolution of these impediments is, in my eyes, imperative, and your support will be valuable. Ladies and gentlemen, it is no coincidence that none of the conference speakers represent an Athenian institution. We intended our conference to be a gathering where the contribution of Athens to the development of philosophy is acknowledged by esteemed colleagues coming from elsewhere. Outstanding scholars who have arrived here from Brazil and India, California and Belgium, Germany and the UK, Crete and Thessaloniki. I extend my gratitude to all these colleagues who accepted our invitation. My sincere thanks to the President of the Hellenic Republic, Ms. Sakelaropoulou, for putting this conference under her auspices. Many thanks to you, Mr. Minister, and Mr. Vice Rectors, for honoring us with your presence. Thanks also to our students for being here with us, and a big thank to all of you as well. Ancient philosophy, welcome back to Athens. There is a 3-minute video.
Athens MA in Ancient Philosophy is a new, intensive, 1-year graduate program offering in-depth knowledge of ancient philosophy and high-level research training. The program promotes the study of ancient Greek philosophy in its entire historical and thematic range, from the pre-Socratics to the philosophers of late antiquity, covering topics in metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. It is one of very few programs worldwide that focus exclusively on ancient philosophy. Those 4 universities have joined forces to create a highly competitive program. Courses will be taught in Athens in the brand new building of the Department of History and Philosophy of Science. Courses will be taught by professors of the 4 participating universities, as well as by visiting scholars from international institutions.
The study of philosophy enhances your ability to evaluate and resolve problems, analyze concepts and arguments. This is true of the study of ancient philosophy first and foremost, for it deals with the origins of the ideas that shaped Western civilization.
Why should someone study ancient philosophy in Athens? First of all, it's very nice to live in Athens. Athens is a big city that has attracted a lot of young people, intellectuals, artists, and of course there are the emblematic sites that anyone who studies ancient philosophy is familiar with. For instance, the King Archon's court in the beginning of the Euthyphro. And even Plato's cave. Some people think that he was inspired to describe this allegory from a cave in Vari, which is here in Attica.
This is a course designed as a survey, so we will be looking at a number of different dialogues from Plato's early and middle periods primarily. We'll read dialogues about the nature of virtue, the relationship between virtue and happiness, or the good life.
The program's duration is a full academic year. 2 semesters of courses are followed by a summer term, during which students will prepare their master's thesis.
So we look forward to welcoming you to Athens.
Ναι, Αλέξανδρε, ναι. Θα μου πείτε σε περίπτωση που είναι πολύ δυνατά ή όχι δυνατά, δεν θα με ενοχλήσετε, γλάτε δίπλα και βγάζετε. Εντάξει, λίγο νεράκι. Και τα κόκκινα γυαλιά μου.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I call on Professor Voulatsounas to speak, I would like to say a couple of words myself. The study of ancient philosophy is a sort of a globally important field these days. It's actually a fascinating fact that so much interest is shown in the thought of the ancients. It's interesting that the revival of Greek philosophy in the world, really, was in great part the work of a Greek, of Grigoris Vlastos, whose memory, I think, should be hovering over this meeting. I think you would have been delighted to know that we're doing what we're doing today. Not only is it important globally, it is one of the most thriving fields within the Greek academic and intellectual situation. In particular, for example, Professors Karasmanis and Kaligas have been offering an informal seminar on ancient texts for the past 30-some years, constantly populated by students, colleagues, and an occasional visitor like me. I would also like to say that in addition to the 4 distinguished departments that are involved in the MA program, the Academy of Athens is cooperating with the program, and the part of the program is a monthly colloquium of lectures, which will be co-organized with the Center for the Study of Greek Philosophy of the Academy of Athens. It will take place in our library on Ypsilantou Street, and we're delighted that the Academy has an opportunity to open itself more to society and to the world in general. So I'm grateful to Professor Thanassas and his colleagues for giving the Academy this opportunity to actually discharge its own duties to the nation. And now, I call on Professor Vula Tsuna, who is Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the University of California, Santa Barbara, somebody I have known since she was a student and who has come a long way since. So we are now in her hands.
Thank you very much, Alexander. First of all, and before I begin, I would like to give all my good wishes for the success of this first English-speaking MA program in ancient philosophy. It's a wonderful step ahead. It's a wonderful initiative. I know that it has been in the making for at least 3 years, and it is so superbly prepared and executed by everyone involved. And I also wish to extend my thanks, therefore, to all the organizers of this conference, and in particular, Panagiotis Thanassas, the director, whose very many hours of work certainly have paid off. So, dear Professor Nehamas, dear colleagues and students, ladies and gentlemen, this paper is motivated by 2 puzzles. First, whether the representation of democracy in Republic 8, which is primarily designed to illustrate the rule of appetite, is an entirely fictional and abstract matter, or also refers to Athenian reality as Plato's Socrates perceives it. And second, whether the 2 arguments of the personified laws of Athens in the Crito are as alien as they are believed to be to Socrates' own way of thinking. These questions have been under debate for very many decades, but so far as I know, they have never been discussed in relation to each other. And yet both passages bear, I shall argue, on what is perceived by several ancient critics as a major problem of Athenian polity, namely that it encourages, or at least tolerates, disregard for the law. To keep within the time frame, I shall mainly talk about Republic 8 and the broader literary context to which, in my view, it partly belongs. And then I shall end with just a suggestion about the Crito. Part 1 of the paper is concerned with the depiction of democracy in Republic 8 and shows that, according to that account, the greatest flaw of the Constitution, politically as well as morally, lies in a particular conception of freedom of eleutheria, dominant in the life of the polis and its citizens. Plato's Socrates, I argue, regularly directs us outside the dialogue frame to his own perception of democratic Athens. Part 2 contextualizes the account of the Republic by giving examples of the so-called literature of dissent, writings, that is, belonging to different genres and targeting the Athenians' individualism, unruliness, and other faults in ways not dissimilar to those of Plato's Socrates. Aristotle will not be included in this approach because his own point of view is partly that of a political theorist rather than an engaged critic, and also because Christoph Rapp is going to talk about Aristotle tomorrow. Part 3, it's just very brief, just a few conclusions and suggestions, and it's going to say that the Republic and other critical writings can offer a new quasi-historical perspective from which the intervention of the laws in the Crito might seem more defensible than it has seemed so far. So part 1, Freedom and the Law in Republic 8. You all have a handout in front of you. I won't be reading, of course, all the passages, but I will be referring to it. In the Republic, Plato's Socrates is not engaged in constitutional theory, nor is he trying systematically to assess the advantages and disadvantages of democracy as such. In relation to the Callipolis, all 4 of the regimes entertained in Book 8 are faulty and constitute stages of a downward path leading to the limiting case of tyranny. Democracy is the 3rd of these regimes, and just a step away from the unhappiest city and the unhappiest man, that is tyranny and the tyrant. The critique of the democratic polity and way of life, therefore, is primarily conducted from an ethical viewpoint. But also, I contend, it has a political and historical dimension, insofar as it challenges a set of values that are absolutely central to the ideology of Athenian democracy. It can fruitfully be read then as an embedded and sustained criticism of that ideology. Following the genealogical model introduced earlier in the story of human decline, Plato's Socrates explains the origins of democracy and likewise of the democratic character in terms of a transition caused by a combination of socio-political factors and emotions, such as fear and contempt, and running through masses of people whom oligarchy has deprived of their property and civil rights. Filled with hatred, he tells us, and the craving to revolt, and look please at T1 in your handout, after they win the victory, they put to death some of the other party, drive out others, and grant to the rest of the citizens an equal share in both citizenship and offices. And for the most part, these offices are assigned by lot, end quote. The question of historicity arises right there. For, as Aristotle remarks in the Politics, democracies don't always spring from oligarchies, nor are they always established through force and terror. The temptation is, therefore, to assume that T1 and the surrounding context have no reference to reality, but are composed in a detached theoretical mode. Not so, as it seems. For Athenians of that era could easily, though not necessarily, associate Socrates' explanation with struggles of the early days of Athenian democracy. Namely, after the fall of the Pisistratids, an oligarchy was installed by Isagoras and his allies, but the poorer strata of the population revolted and took over. And now I am paraphrasing from contemporary sources. They executed Isagoras. They exiled several others. They punished many others, and they recalled Cleisthenes, whose radical reforms set the foundations of our democracy. Lexically, as well as conceptually, T1 could be referring to that remote past. Be this as it may, Republic 8 is less concerned with the Cleisthenian ideal of equality and much more with eleutheria, freedom, or rather a particular conception of freedom, which according to Plato's Socrates is both the dominant value of democracy and its greatest peril. T2, Quote, "What then is their manner of life? What is the quality of such a constitution? To start with, are not the people free? And is not the city overflowing with liberty and freedom of speech? And has not every man the license to do whatever he wants? Indeed, so it is said, legetae Dei," he replied. End quote. T2 identifies eleutheria as the key value determining both the nature of the democratic constitution and the distinctive features of the democratic life. It is not a mere feeling or attitude, but an objective condition obtaining for each citizen as well as the city. While the primary associations of eleutheria have to do with political autonomy with regard to a conqueror or a tyrant, here eleutheria is the personal freedom to act as one wants and live as one pleases. And it is coupled with parrhesia, the right to speak one's mind freely without fear or constraint, but also insolent and disrespectful speech indiscriminately addressed to all and sundry. Both eleutheria and parrhesia are central to the ideology of the Periclean era, as is the idea articulated in the funeral oration that by virtue of their freedom, eleutheros, the Athenians respect one's right to do what they please and don't interfere in each other's private life. The reference to Athens in T2 is unmistakable. Adimantus, a thoroughbred Athenian representing here Plato's half-brother, confirms that the total freedom filling the city is acknowledged by all. Quote, "Yes," he asserts, "so it is said," end quote. Within the tale, such freedom of speech and action is not contingent, but essential to the democratic state. T3 lays out some of the implications and directs us again beyond the literary frame to the city of Athens. T3, and I quote part of it, "In such a city, there is no compulsion whatsoever to hold office, even if you are qualified to do so, or obey those who hold office if you don't want to. There is no compulsion to go to war when the rest of the citizens are at war, or keep the peace when the other citizens do so, unless you feel like it. Isn't such conduct splendid and pleasant just now? At least in this circumstance," says Adimantus, "perhaps it is. And isn't the praotis, the mellowness of some convicted criminals, come see, elegant? Or have you never seen in such a polity men condemned to death or to exile, who nonetheless remain and go here and there in our midst?" End quote. T3 illustrates the connection between freedom and the rule of epithymia, of desire, and, in my view here, appetitive desire, in the life of the democratic city and its citizens, and it suggests that the two generic senses of freedom, of democratic freedom in particular, namely the right to live as one pleases and the right to rule and to be ruled, are in fact in tension. For no one wants to be told whether or not to become a magistrate or a juror, and generally no one is compelled to observe the law, prescriptive or proscriptive, unless one feels like it. Isn't this way of life wonderful and pleasant just now, says Socrates, en to parautika? And Adimantus answers, perhaps, at least in these circumstances. So both characters appear familiar with all this and familiar with the tolerance and gentleness, the praotis, that democratic Athens historically prides itself for. Adimantus tells us that he has actually seen many convicts promenading in the city's streets. Socrates' presentation of the democratic character is also relevant to our topic. In the quasi-anarchic situation caused by the cult of total freedom, the tracks of the city and the soul become enmeshed. The city has little structure and even fewer norms. And therefore, what the democratic character says or does, both as a private individual and as a citizen, largely depends on his own desires and modes of perceiving. In particular, after the transformation of the oligarch's son into the democratic type has been completed, the latter, we are told, finds himself at the mercy of fierce desires which have prevailed over natural feelings and have captured, this is Socrates' words, the citadel of his soul. The military metaphor indicates that those appetites are now in complete command of every aspect of the youth's lives, beliefs, objectives, actions. And his conduct in the democratic polis is mainly determined by two things: an inverse spectrum of virtues and their corresponding vices, which you can see in text 4, and an application of the principle of equality, according to which all pleasures are deemed equally choice-worthy. If you look a little at text 4, the sense of shame, we are told, they call stupidity. Temperance, they call unmanliness. Hubris, anarchy. Extravagance, shamelessness, and they are wreathed and radiant, and they follow by a large chorus of followers. Anarchy, they call freedom, and extravagance, they call magnificence. Not only does the democratic conception of Eleftheria serve as the basis of Socrates' critique and relates the latter to Athenian reality, it also provides the key in order to understand why the democratic city, as well as the democratic man, are ranked so low among the faulty polities and types. Like democracy and oligarchy, democracy too bears in itself the seeds of its own destruction. But unlike those other polities, its immense disunity and ineffectiveness of the laws and rulers eventually leads to the dissolution of civilized order, this time not to another constitutional order, but to savagery, the savagery of tyranny. T5 indicates how the lust of excessive freedom contributes to that process. T6 now. The father, we are told, gets into the habit of resembling the child and afraid of his sons. The son has neither shame nor fear towards the parents, and all this is so that he may be free. The metic is equal to the citizen to the metic, and the same holds for a foreigner. Yes, says Adeimantus again, this is how these things actually happen. Indeed, they do, concurs Socrates. And the climax of popular freedom, my friend, is reached in such a city when the purchased slaves, male or female, are no less free than the owners who paid for them. The point here is not that Plato likes slavery. The point is that slavery is a hierarchical relation within a particular framework. And so what he is observing is that the excessive freedom is in fact undermining all such relations. He doesn't tell us whether this is good or bad. Evoking Aeschylus in text 6, Socrates adds what came to his mouth just then: the free circulation of animals in the streets of the democratic city. And Adeimantus again concurs. When I walk, he says, in the country, I frequently notice men making room for horses and donkeys. These remarks are, of course, tongue-in-cheek, but the idea is serious. Civilized society relies on hierarchical structures of various sorts. Both law and custom determine the norms governing these relations, which, however, are incompatible with the total eleftheria of the democratic city. Far from tolerating norms, people in this latter tend towards transgressing limits. Therein lies, and I quote from Socrates, therein lies the fine and sturdy root of tyranny. This should be read, of course, as part of the central argument of the Republic, but it also can be read as a warning. If Athenian democracy doesn't temper its love for freedom with the obligations set by the law, it will fall in the clutches of an enemy that is ever present at the imaginary level in Athens, namely the political tyrant. Part 2. Comparative parallels. While the main function of the tale is philosophical and uniquely tied to the central argument of the Republic, the specific criticisms aimed at democracy are not so very unusual, I suggest. Authors belonging to what Josiah Ober aptly has called the community of dissent also show concern about similar aspects of the Athenians' polity and life. We should look at some examples. The Constitution of the Athenians, or otherwise the Old Oligarch, is a text probably composed in the 420s from an openly anti-democratic standpoint. Excessive freedom, bad governance, the absence of norms, the abuse of the law are among its main themes. The author also denounces the corrosion of civic and social hierarchies, the licentiousness prevailing in the city. So again, there is a lot of talk about desires and appetites and pleasures, and the extreme variety and diversity of the Athenian way of life. In T7, a contrast is suggested between the freedom of the many and the voluntary submission to the law. In truth, the Old Oligarch says in T8, the Athenian demos has destroyed the norms, including those governing, get this, music and gymnastics, but also civic activities and institutions and social functions. One cannot tell apart free citizens from purchased slaves, Athenians from foreigners. The slaves dress like free men. They live pleasurably, even sumptuously, like free men. And there is isigoria, equality from all to all and in respect of all. And T8 explains how this happens. T9 talks about the multicolored cloth of the democratic state. It's a Platonic phrase, but the content, the idea, is exactly the same. Look, please, at T9. While the Greeks in their own cities tend to have their own language, way of life, and manner of dressing, the Athenians use a mixture selected by all Greeks. Athenian democracy, it is suggested, is a patchwork of heterogeneous elements which don't constitute a genuine political unit. It is natural to think that in such a community, everyone will do as they please, and no one will want to heed the law. Thucydides is concerned with similar themes. In a famous passage of the history, T10, he comments in propria persona on the rule of Pericles, his leadership of the demos, and the erratic behavior of the demos, and the degradation of democratic politics by those who came after him. But particularly instructive is T11. It is for us to read an excerpt from Cleon's speech to the Athenians. Cleon is trying to convince them that if they want to retain the empire, they must be consistent in their own decisions. And in this particular case, they really must slaughter the Mytileneans, which they had originally decided to do. Look, please, at T11. The worst thing is to refuse to see that a city whose laws are worse but are always applied is stronger than it would be if it had good laws that were not obeyed. Humbler people are usually better citizens because very intelligent ones want to appear wiser than the laws. And then he turns towards the Athenians and he says, the cause of danger is you who are always misled by novelties, you who are quick to approve of anyone who is about to say anything clever, you who are led by the pleasures of hearing and are more like lovers of sight, following sophistical displays, rather than citizens deliberating about their own city. End quote. Of course, the speech of Cleon, the objective of the speech, is morally repulsive. But even so, we should record his contention that it is better to have worse laws applied than better which are not applied, as well as the charge that the Athenians consider themselves wiser than the laws and therefore do not obey them. Let's turn to comedy. Aristophanes' Assemblywomen, the Ecclesiazuse, is written around 395 in one of the worst periods in the history of Athens. In this hilarious play, the women of Athens effect a fantastic constitutional coup. Led by Praxagora, they are voted into power and the city is handed over to them. New legislation is introduced which abolishes private property and family units and decrees that children and sexual partners will be common to all. T12 represents a conversation between two men, one who acts in obedience to the newly voted law and intends to surrender his belongings to the state, the other resolutely resisting such an action. Look please at T12. Why are your things lined up like this? Well, we are getting them ready to go to the marketplace to give our things over to the state. It is the law of the land. Kata tous de dogmenus nomos. You mean you turn your things in? By God, you are a loser. Really? Am I not supposed to obey the laws? What laws? The laws that have been duly enacted. How stupid can you really get? So, I end with Isocrates' Areopagiticus, written approximately 20 years after the conventional date of the Republic. It is, in the aftermath of the so-called social war, it expresses deep concern for the political decadence of Athens and proposes the institution of patrios politia. And please note this expression because it includes the idea that the politia is like a parent as well as being ancestral, as Kurt Lauflaub has demonstrated. The city's ancestral constitution then, and in particular the authority of the Areopagus, the city's supreme court, are the things to be restituted. It is in favor of democracy, he says in T15, that I intend to speak. Our forefathers did not establish a constitution hailed as the most democratic and tolerant, koinotati kai praotati, only in name, nor did they establish a polity that trained the citizens in such a manner that they believe insolence to be democracy and lawlessness to be freedom. So again, we have this inverse spectrum of virtues and vices that is here at play. T16 gives us a better idea of what counterfeit tolerance might be, while T17 comments the control of on the control of appetites, the attention to early education, and the scrutiny of the youth's private life. Not unlike Plato, Isocrates seems to think that the great faults of contemporary Athens have to do not so much with democracy itself as with the moral condition of the citizens and their misconception of liberty and the fact that they don't receive an education befitting truly free men. Although very selective, I hope this survey gave support to two claims. First, some aspects of Republic 8 represent commonly shared and historically documented perceptions of Athenian democracy at that time. And second, Plato and other authors are deeply disturbed by the tension between the Athenian conception or misconception of personal freedom and the claims of legality and morality. To end this talk, I would like to suggest that, considered from that perspective, the much maligned arguments of the Crito, or the laws in the Crito, appear well motivated and not unreasonable. They are not intended to advocate legalistic totalitarianism, as so often it has been claimed. They are intended to address what is perceived as a grave and very real problem for Athenian democracy, and arguably for its modern counterparts as well. So the background of the law's intervention is found in T20 and T19, and I don't want to linger over that. The former of these texts articulates the principle of justice, according to which wrongdoing is always unjust, even in retaliation. The latter, text 19, states that according to that principle, Socrates' escape would be both illegal and unjust. And moreover, the laws add, such an act would amount not merely to an attempt of harming them, but to an attempt to destroy them as far as he could. The laws note that the laws make no mention of the justice or injustice of Socrates' condemnation. The verdict of the court is what it is. What is at issue is Socrates' right to escape and the justice or injustice of his proposed course of action. One idea is prominent above all: a city in which legitimate court decisions have no force will fall apart. The gist of the law's intervention is found in T21 and 22. The so-called paternalistic arguments combines the metaphor of the laws as good parents and the laws as good masters. The good is in parentheses, but I believe it to be embedded in the argument, in order to suggest that the relation of the citizen to the state is asymmetrical and also ethically laden. On the side of the parent, there are expectations of wisdom, benevolence, and responsibility towards the dependent, and these expectations are built into Athenian legislation, as I found out. On the side of the child or the slave, the expectation is reciprocation. So it's not a mere game of power here. The argument appeals to a moral and psychological bond assumed to hold between the parties. And something similar, and I don't have the time to go into this, holds for the second argument too, the contractual argument. To conclude, in light of the evidence discussed earlier, we can see the attraction that the arguments of the laws or the intervention of the laws could have had for Plato's Socrates. In a city described as unruly and as fragmented, the laws of Athens make a plea to that most virtuous and most loyal of all citizens, to respect them as others would not, and to obey them as others would not. His decision should not surprise us. To be sure, Plato's Socrates has many negative things to say about democracy in general and about Athenian democracy in particular. But in principle, I think there is nothing anti-democratic about the view that in a well-governed democracy, in a constitutional democracy, the law must be sovereign and personal freedom must be constrained by its commands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is time for a couple of questions. I wonder if people would like to raise some of the issues that Professor Tsuna raised so well in her lecture. The floor is open. I know it's a bit imposing to speak in a room like this.
Can I come down now? Can I come down now?
Come down now.
Thank you.
Going one? Ah, yes, please. Microphone.
Thank you so much for the talk. That was really insightful. I'm actually hopefully not stepping on my own feet tomorrow. So the question I have, I find it quite compelling, your argument about it not having to be anti-democratic as such. But in Book 8, right, part of the problem that he has with this possibly dystopian, possibly actual democracy is not just an excess of freedom, but the equality of equals and unequals alike. And you also point that out here. And that kind of plays into the whole proper ordering of the city and how things should be. Now, I mean, it seems, I mean, if he's criticizing not just so, and I think the problem with the freedom seems to be not just an absence of constraints, but it seems to be very closely linked to this perceived excessive egalitarianism, which does seem to be somewhat central to democracy. So if one takes the criticism of egalitarianism along with that of freedom, does that not kind of push us towards a more strongly anti-democratic reading of Book 8?
I think can you hear me? Yeah. I think that what Plato's Socrates is resisting in the idea of equality, of all to all. To put it roughly, the absence of meritocracy. I think that is for him the main problem. I don't think even having in mind the Gorgias, even having in mind dialogues where he's virulent criticism of democracy, but I would go even much later. I would go to the laws. Always the thing, one line of criticism is democracy makes massive en masse. Everybody makes decisions on certain things that are very important, namely moral things. And there is no real knowledge of that. So that is one line of criticism. And I believe myself that Plato does not have a dogmatic answer, one single answer to that. I think that he explores it from different ways. So the Republic is one way of exploring it. The Politicus is another way of exploring it. All the kind of discussions about the kind of architectonic sort of arts, the overarching art that can comprise all the other arts and coordinate them. You see the Charmides, you see the Euthydemus, you see the Politicus. That is yet another way of exploring it. And then we come to the laws, where actually he states in as many words that the law is above the ruler. So equality, the way perceives equality is through this distorting glass, which we see in other authors as well. They are worried about the expressions that equality, the ideal of equality, takes in the actual framework of democratic Athens. And that's not the Athens of Clisthenes. That is the Athens after Pericles, mostly.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I have a question which may be methodologically wrong, but I've been wondering, you've brought in the Crito, and you've tried in a way, if I understood you correctly, to justify arguments in Crito on the basis of the material provided in the Republic. Am I correct in this? The reason I'm asking, which I said it may be methodologically wrong, is that in my mind, I mean, I was thinking of the Crito as a very early, piece, and the Republic, sort of more mature reflection on democracy and everything. So I've been wondering, again, as I said, it may be totally wrong. I mean, to what extent could we say that Crito anticipates an attitude which could be brought in to counter or to correct the situation described in the Republic? On the other hand, in the Republic, we have far more, as far as I understand it, aristocratic ideas towards, the end with philosopher kings and everything with the ideal city. So could you please comment on this, on the extent to which the chronological order of the composition of the text may have a significance? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. I believe that the dialogues must be, and the arguments must be assessed within dialogue. And this is something I am doing for the Crito in the continuation of the study. So I'm not importing from the Republic to justify the Crito. I agree with you. Some people do that, right? I mean, there are methodologies and methodologies. There are methodologies that allow that. Yours and mine don't, because they are analytic. So what I do is to try to contextualize the arguments in the Crito. I mean, the usual reaction is, laws as parents, blech. What does this mean? There exist abusive parents. That's not the point. That is what I am trying to say. And to do that, what I did was to look at historical documents, which of course, again, reproduce perceptions of the period, but to look into the legislation some. And as a matter of fact, you find the assumptions grounding the arguments. What does the Republic offer, and what does this other literature of dissent offer? It offers us a vantage point from which to look at what might be a motivation for Socrates. Why was it so important for Socrates to stay in prison and die? Why did he perceive this to be such a major moral issue as well as a major political issue? And I believe that the Republic and all this other literature, and there is very much more, actually offers us a perspective, a telescopic perspective from which to look at the arguments in the Crito.
Mr. Kapandes has a question.
Thank you, Vula, for this talk. I'd like to put a question at the way you closed your intervention, which encapsulates in a very good way the entire talk, I think. Well, you said that whereby there's nothing anti-democratic in the idea that personal freedom must be in some way or other constrained. I agree to that, and I also find it difficult to find any thinker, unless perhaps some Russian anarchists who would disagree on that. My question is a kind of worry that throughout the ages, this was something that many totalitarian, a variation of that claim was made by many totalitarian people, even dictators. So the idea was that, never mind, this is not anti-democratic, this is something that embedded within democracy, a kind of restraining personal freedom. So the crux of the matter is how much. And what is your view of Plato against that standard?
Thank you very much for this question. First thing I want to say is that, yes, this is what totalitarian regimes claim. And that is why the Crito has been accused of promoting totalitarianism of some kind. I think two issues come to mind, and there are many more. The first is a matter of legitimacy. For the laws to be obeyed, there is a constitutional framework that needs to be in place. That constitutional framework is very much in place in democratic Athens. The fact that it unravels, there are parts of it that are unraveling, that is what the effort is to back after the Peloponnesian War. That is why you have all this literature of criticism. So a matter of legitimacy is what is it that makes the laws of the state. Incidentally, that is why I don't think it is appropriate to say that the attitude in the Crito contradicts the fact that Socrates, as he tells us in the Apology, didn't obey the 30, and also if the court would have released him on condition, he would have obeyed God rather than the court. The second is a constitutional impossibility for Athens. The first is actually not only it's not constitutional, but it was an order issued by those that abolished the constitution. So I think that the issue of legitimacy here is difficult. It is a big issue. And when we talk about totalitarianism, in my view, it's the first issue to be addressed. So regarding Plato, well, I wouldn't be ready to put my hand in the fire yet about this, but if there is a distinction between Plato, Socrates, and Plato, and one wants to adopt some sort of developmentalism, I wouldn't be ready to put my hand in the fire, but my hunch is that Plato's belief that the law must be sovereign is pretty much as strong as Socrates'. And I know that I am in a minority in saying that.
One more question in the back. Let's see. Okay, we'll have one more from this gentleman and then one from this side.
Thank you. Thank you, Vula, very much. I really like the way that you matched up the elements, the two critiques, the one on emotions and the one on passions in the Republic, and also in the historical evidence that you provide in the second part. But I'm wondering whether the Crito is the laws in the Crito reply to both. It seems to me that they focus more to the objections, to the emotional problems of democracy, and less to the desired problems of democracy. Yeah, I was saying that I liked what you made at with the criticism of the Republic, that you raised both the criticism with reference to emotions and the criticism with reference to passions as separate points. And then we find the parallels both in the old oligarch and in the Thucydides, and that was very nice. My only worry is that the replies to those two different types of attacks to democracy in the Crito, it's not symmetrical. We have evidence for the passions, the honor, and so on and so forth. But I don't see in the Crito, in the arguments by the laws, I don't see any reply to the desires problems for the.
Thank you for the question. You don't see any talk about emotions because overtly there isn't any. The fact that the criticism about emotions running riot because of excessive freedom is a criticism that you see in many authors, not in all, and it certainly isn't part of the subject in the Crito. The point of the arguments of the Crito is very different. So what I was sketching when I was referring to other authors talking about emotions and passions were the parallels with the lines of criticism that we see in the Republic, and in doing so, I was answering the first of the two puzzles that I mentioned at the beginning, namely, does the Republic or does it not have any connection whatsoever to actual historical conditions in Athens of that time?
One last question.
Thank you. My question is that is it possible to interpret the passages of Plato about democracy in another way? It means, yeah, it's more about the meat, about the soul. It's not just about democracy. We see that you made some good parallel, but I think maybe the difference is that for Isocrates, when Isocrates talks about democracy, it's just about politics. But even if Plato also is interested in politics, ultimately he wants to talk about the goodness of the soul, because if we see the whole book of Republic, Socrates shows very clearly that it's difficult to know directly the soul. So it's good to think about politics, which is more familiar with us. So just like that, philosopher king should be deteriorated into aristocracy and then democracy and then tyranny. So it's somehow utopic. Also, the soul of human being could be deteriorated. Yeah, that is why at the end of the book, Socrates talks about the judgment after life and the reincarnation of the soul. Yeah, because the soul of human being couldn't totally be solved in this life, so we should expect it, the life afterlife. So yeah, maybe do you think it's rather possible to interpret it, the democracy just as not the politic itself, but more rather as meat of the soul? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Both Isocrates, you mentioned Isocrates and Plato, and you said many things, so I'll have to choose some of them. So 2 things. Both Isocrates and Plato, or rather I should say Isocrates as well as Plato, are concerned with the city and with the soul, and see some connection between the two. In one of the texts in your handout, you see Isocrates saying early education matters. Why? Because the soul of young people is filled with appetites and they need to get a handle on them. In Plato, the whole argument is built on an analogy between the city and the soul. Now, I don't believe there are direct causal links. That is, the idea is not that because the citizens are virtuous, for instance, the city is virtuous, because then we get into the kind of problem that Bernard Williams has diagnosed. But I do think that these are parallel as tracks. And we must not underestimate the city track. The city track plays a very important role in the argument. For the reasons that are given in book 2, it helps us discern certain things better, or perhaps think about psychological facts and powers in a new way by having the structure of the city in mind. So I think I would resist downplaying the civic, social, and political element of the Republic, just in favor of the psychological element. Argument is about psychology, but the politics are built there from the very beginning.
Thank you very much for this exciting presentation, which brought a lot of discussion. Thank you. Before I close the session, I'd like to point out that our ultimate audience is actually the set of great Greek philosophers, which I hadn't noticed until now. So we have to be careful what we say. But anyway, with this wonderful talk, the Athens MA in Ancient Philosophy is both de jure and de facto started. Let us wish it kaloriziko, and let's get to work. Thank you.
No, coffee first. Now we move to the Argyriadis Amphitheater, down the stairs and then to the right. And the speakers are invited to a coffee there as well. So, and we start the next session at 12:10, I would say.